Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Parsha Pearls. And today we're going to look at something a little bit different because we are currently in the Hebrew month of Adar. And our rabbis tell us when the month of Adar comes in, you have to increase in joy. And this year, it's a Jewish leap year, which means we have 2 months of Adar, which means a double dose of joy. There was a couple who just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and he's sitting there sipping this fine glass of 18-year-old Glenrothe, and he says aloud, "I love you so much. I really didn't know how I could ever live without you." And she looked to him and she said, "Honey, is that you or the whiskey talking?" And he replied, "It's me talking to the whiskey." We're about to step into Purim in just a few weeks' time, essentially the happiest day on the Jewish calendar, which is precisely why these months of Adar are imbued with so much happiness and joy. But it begs the question, because one of the mitzvot of the day is to have a l'chaim, or 2, or 3. Of course, maybe the ideal, you might argue, would be best if we need not have resorted to that. The happiness maybe should be natural, maybe instinctive, but nevertheless, there's a mitzvah to be happy on the day. And let's be honest, we're all too often consumed with life. Our minds are always racing. We're always finding ourselves preoccupied. We hardly take the necessary time to just exhale. And that in turn can be emotionally stifling, and that in turn can impede our ability to experience happiness in the way that we ought to. To be sure, beyond Purim, there's a mitzvah daily to be happy. And thus the wording and the directive of the rabbis is when the month of Adar comes in, increase in simcha, increase in joy, which means joy is a default position regardless. But now increase even more so. But let's face it, yes, there's a mitzvah daily to be happy, but unless you have a rabbi who's constantly telling you jokes, or someone special always available to you to put a smile on your face, it's hard to come by. So it begs the question, I mean, really, is that what Jewish law is encouraging us to do, resorting to alcohol to somehow engender the happiness? I got to drink to be happy. In fact, consider what Jewish law says. On Purim, the mitzvah is to drink ad de lo yada, until you don't know. The literal translation, until you don't know, until you are unaware. And then halacha continues, it says, unaware between the difference of blessed be Mordechai and cursed be Haman. In other words, Jewish law is encouraging and mandating an extreme form of inebriation, and it begs clarity. The Talmud tells a story of a certain rabbi called Rabbi Broka who found himself standing in the middle of a marketplace in the middle of the afternoon, side by side with Elijah the prophet, as one does. And he was reflecting and pondering upon all the people walking around to and fro. And he was reflecting upon all of their varying apparent statures, some more astute looking, others maybe seemingly more boorish. And he asked Elijah the prophet, is there anyone here who is unique, who is extraordinary? Is there anyone within this marketplace that is really special? Really, it was a whole eclectic mix of people, and the rabbi wanted to know if there was anyone unique, extraordinary, maybe really righteous amongst them. And Elijah immediately responded by pointing out 2 brothers who were walking along. And the rabbi, of course, became very excited. Here was a rare opportunity to encounter 2 lofty individuals. What was their uniqueness, he wondered. So he goes running after the 2 brothers, and he says to them, "Gentlemen, forgive me for intruding like this, but I need to ask you a question. Can I ask you, what is it that you do? What is your profession?" And they replied simply, "We are jesters. We make sad people laugh. And when we see people in a quarrel, we use some humor to cheer them up and thereby make peace between them." Now, then and there, right here at face value, we already see the power of happiness, the power of joy. These men, whom for all we know, might be simple in every other way, but they made it their life's mission, their whole preoccupation to make other people happy. What is it that defined their uniqueness? The power of happiness. Nevertheless, comes along the famous Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, And he makes the point that he says, in actual fact, these two brothers were indeed lofty individuals. They were like hidden tzaddikim, very righteous people who were more concealed in terms of their righteousness. They didn't overtly, no one knew. And he explained that in actual fact, whenever they would encounter somebody, they would be able to immediately identify the uniqueness of the soul within that person. And then they would be able to connect that soul of that person to the soul source of that soul up above. And if they determined that there was any negative decree against that person, God forbid, they'd be able to annul the decree. But if they encountered somebody who was sad, who was walking around melancholy, they wouldn't be able to make that connection. So they would have to first cheer the person up and then make the connection, and then if necessary, annul any decree. And what that forcefully demonstrates is how powerful happiness is, and how the contrary to happiness can be a real impediment to your own soul and to being able to experience the implicit blessings that are all around us. Thus said the 19th century scholar Rabbi Aaron of Kalin, sadness is not a sin. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, thou shalt not be sad. But what it can lead to can be a lot worse than any sin. What does that mean? Again, sadness is not a sin. It doesn't say anywhere in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not be sad. But it is, as we've just demonstrated, undeniably an impediment, a brick wall. It obstructs the inherent blessings in our lives. Not just in the spiritual sense, as per the story that I just shared with you and the Baal Shem Tov's explanation, but even every bit in the practical sense as well. Because inasmuch as there is blessing in all of our lives, we will allow for the sadness to override and consume us to a point where we ignore, if not become utterly oblivious to those blessings. So the blessings, they don't disappear. We just mask over them with our own doom and gloom attitude, and it becomes a formidable challenge to rediscover them. That sometimes can take us to places where even the worst of sins can't take us. There was a woman who walked up to a wrinkled old man rocking frailly in a chair on his porch with a big smile on his face, looking so happy. She says, I can't help noticing how happy you look. What's your secret for a long, happy life? And he raised his hand weakly to gesture, and he said, I smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day. I also drink a case of whiskey a week. I eat fatty foods, and I never exercise. She says, wow, that's amazing. How old are you? He says, I'm 26. Happiness and joy are not conditions, are not just conditions of the mind and heart. They have direct bearing on your overall disposition and the way you function in life. And the reason why we have this month of Adar and this whole month that we experience the joy which spills over into the whole month, and again, this year over the 2 months on account of Purim, tells us about how we have to learn to discover the joy of every single day, to recognize the joy of challenge, yes, the joy of growth, and the rest of life will come of itself. Because let's face it, the world is made up of only 2 types of people. Those who wake up, open their eyes and say, oh, good morning, God. And others who wake up, open their eyes and say, oh, good God, morning. The difference is one where you either despondently see every rose bush has thorns or joyously perceive how even thorn bushes have roses. And as we well know, on every main Jewish festival, the priests mount the duchen, the area in front of the ark, in our shuls, and they proceed to bless us with the priestly blessing. Why is that special ritual limited to just the main festivals and not every Shabbat, if not, in fact, every day, as yes, indeed, Sephardim do? Because we have a principle of, and you shall rejoice in your festivals, says the Torah. During these auspicious times, we are in a better frame of mind. We are in a happier disposition. And that is what makes us more susceptible to receiving those priestly blessings. Happiness and blessings, they're directly correlated. You can't properly experience one without the other. With that in mind, let's consider the following. There's one Torah portion, much later on in the book of Deuteronomy, that enumerates 98 curses that can befall somebody on account of, well, that's the problem. The Torah doesn't tell us on account of what. The Torah never stipulates exactly what offenses could warrant such extreme consequences of 98 curses. What could a person do that is so terrible that it warrants such retribution? Seems so out of keeping with Jewish thinking that is typically upbeat, encouraging, and forgiving. The famous mystic, the Arizal, points out one verse in the middle of it all that says simply, because you didn't serve God with joy and gladness of heart. In simple terms, you're a good Jew, you're a law-abiding Jew, you're a mensch who does his or her thing, you make your contribution, but you're not happy. You're restless and you're never really at peace with yourself. You never stop long enough to simply smell the roses. You do what you have to do, whether in life in general or in your Judaism in particular, but everything is routine. You go through the motions. You're not really upbeat. You're not really enjoying. There's no gladness of heart. Maimonides says that a person who restrains themselves from functioning in a joyous manner is a fool. Why a fool? Because a lot of things are inherent in life. Aging, illness, God forbid, loss, death. But these events don't have to be the cause of ongoing sadness. Yes, these events cause grief and sadness. But grief and sadness pass like everything else and are replaced with other experiences. But all too often, we tend to cling to the negative thoughts and feelings. And as a result, we magnify, we intensify, we sustain those emotions whilst overlooking the subtle feelings of joy, gratitude, excitement, adventure, love, and peace that life has to offer. And then, of course, if you're ignoring all that, you compound the negative. And frankly, that then, says Maimonides, is a foolhardy approach. So coming back to the 98 curses, they're not really curses. They're blessings in disguise. God doesn't issue curses, and blessings abound around us all of the time. The disgruntlement and the frustration that you feel in life is often entirely of your own making. Your self-imposed discontentedness blocks the arteries leading towards a happy heart. And therefore, if you're unhappy, you're never going to see the bigger picture in life. You'll ignore the inherent blessings, and everything then will essentially be seen and experienced in a negative context. The blessings are there, but you're not happy. You don't see them. You're consumed with the negative, and frankly, that's a curse. Why is it someone can be walking around burdened by life, and then maybe at a kiddush, they have a l'chaim or two, and then in the moment, they're happy? Just ask the people who attend a kiddush club or whatever. They're the ones who mean it most, because inherently we are all happy. I'm not just a body burdened by life. I have a spiritual self which sees the implicit blessings in everything. But let's face it, like we said at the outset, life masks over it, sometimes with many layers, such that, again, all I see are curses, my supposed bad luck. But what happens when you drink? Our sages tell us when alcohol comes in, the secrets come out. Meaning, alcohol enables you to transcend whatever it is that's inhibiting your life, even if only for the moment. And that exposes the truth, the deeper reality within. Now, for the record, I have to stress I'm not advocating drinking. I'm just making the bigger point here as to how much of our discontentment is generated by our own minds and our overthinking. And here's a fascinating point. Do you know, we have this concept called gematria, where you add up the Hebrew letters of a word. When you add up the Hebrew letters, and every letter has its own value, of the word l'chaim, you get 98. We spoke of 98 curses. That's no coincidence. You can turn it all around. You just have to recalibrate your thinking process and figure out how to unleash the true you. And that then would be the point of what halacha tells us in respect to Purim as well. Drink to the point of ad delo yada, till you don't know. In other words, till you stop thinking. The idea of the alcohol, in other words, removes the inhibition. Stop thinking, stop overthinking, stop being consumed with everything going on around you that is just literally getting in the way of your ability to experience true and lasting happiness. Did you know that it has been scientifically demonstrated that being grumpy, especially in middle age, can knock almost a decade off your life? Professor Frederick Schellman of Umeå University in Sweden claims that those with a more melancholic disposition, especially always worried about aging and money or whatever it is, are going to live an average 7.5 years less. And he wrote an article in Nordic Psychology where he talks about the stress levels generated, etc. And I think it's actually a lot more than that. God put us here for a reason. We all have purpose. We all have missions to fulfill. We all have people to impact. We all have lives to transform. But you can't do any of that when you don't want to do any of that, when you're not naturally inclined to do any of that, because you are too caught up in your own sorrows. Your mission is your destiny. It's the you at your holiest, at your happiest, at your best, reaching your full potential. You simply need to nurture that. Life is all about getting excited when opportunity presents itself. And I'll finish with this anecdote about a certain rabbi, he was known as the Rebbe Rashab, who came to a town. And all the townsfolk came to see him at different opportunities, private audience. One particular gentleman comes in to see him and he asks him, this is going back to the 1800s, he goes, "Was Herzig in Kharkov? How are things in Kharkov?" A place that we're all now very familiar with. And he said, in Kharkov, everything is amazing. The shuls are inspiring. The people get along so wonderfully with each other. The education is superb. Everything in Kharkov is wonderful. And the Rebbe looked at him, gave him a gold coin, and said, "Thank you very much." And off he went. An hour or so later, another chassid comes in. Was Herzig in Kharkov? How are things in Kharkov? In Kharkov, things are not great. The shuls are so uninspiring. The people are always quarreling with each other. The education is so mediocre. He said, it's not, And the Rebbe looked at him and said, "Thank you." And he sent him on his way. That was it. As fate would have it, the two Hasidim meet up together at an inn that same evening. And the first one is telling the second one, the Rebbe asked me, "How are things in Kharkov?" And after I told him, he gave me a gold coin. And the second guy's incredulous. What? He goes, leaving the inn right away, goes running straight to the Rebbe. And he says, "I don't understand." He says, "You asked me the same question as him. He sold you a bill of goods. I told you the absolute truth of what's going on in Kharkov. How come he gets a gold coin and I don't?" And the Rebbe Rashab looked to him with a twinkle in his eye, and he says, "Dumains, do you think I don't know what's going on in Kharkov? I know exactly what's going on in Kharkov. I just wanted to know which Kharkov you live in." And therein lies the point. At the end of the day, there are two Kharkovs in each of our lives. And happiness is a choice. Two types of people in the world: those who choose to be happy and those who choose to be unhappy. Real happy people are happy because they choose to be happy, they make themselves happy, they maintain a positive outlook, and they remain at peace with themselves. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can always control what happens inside of you. Thus, we're a product of our choices, not of our circumstances. And that means that a happy person is not a person in a certain set of circumstances, but rather a person with a certain set of attitudes. Two Kharkovs. Everyone has one of two stories. The good news is that you get to be the author. You get to choose which one to write. Wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.